Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Cutting Room Floor. Here's a chance for us to dig a little bit deeper into one of the themes or one of the ideas that is connected to a recent message here at Sunny Slope Church. We're starting a series on the seven, what are often called the seven deadly sins. And between now and Easter, we're going to be going through each one of the so-called seven deadly sins. Now, I know that some people might hear this and you might be wondering, wait a minute, isn't that a Catholic thing? Like, isn't that something that the Catholics focus more on? And the answer is, well, maybe in some ways, yes. There's a little bit more history, especially recent history in the Roman Catholic Church, and a little more focus on the seven deadly sins. But there's been kind of a rebirth, even in Protestant circles, about what the so-called seven deadly sins are and why they matter. I thought it might be helpful to just trace a little bit of the history of where did the seven deadly sins come from? What are we talking about when we're actually talking about them? The history of the seven deadly sins, as they're called, I'm going to give you an alternative name here in a few minutes, but the history of them can be traced all the way back to about the fourth century. During that time, you had a group of people known as the Desert Fathers. And they were a group of people who, when they looked at the world around them, they looked at big cities like Alexandria and Rome, and um, they saw a lot of excesses. They saw, the sort of the wealth and the glamour and the glitz of the age. And they believed that many of those things presented temptations that could actually hinder their Christian growth and their Christian faith. And so what they did is they withdrew into the Egyptian desert. They withdrew into the Sinai desert, away from all of the temptations of the world, and they wanted to focus on holiness and on spiritual growth. One of those desert fathers was a man named um, Evagrius. Evagrius. He actually lived from the year 345 or 346 or so to the year 399. So he wasn't a very old man when he died, but in the time that he was alive, he did a lot of contemplation, a lot of thinking on the nature of temptation. And he identified certain temptations that we face. He actually came up with eight of them that he saw as some of the most fundamental or basic temptations. And then a lot of other temptations could kind of be tacked onto those eight basic temptations. He actually called those eight temptations. He didn't call them the seven deadly sins or anything like that. He didn't really have a name for them, but he described them as cracks in the heart. And in his mind, these were like a little fissure in you can maybe picture in concrete today when you get a little bit of water in and then it gets cold and it freezes and then the crack can expand every so much and over time you get, potholes. He kind of saw these eight basic temptations in that way, working that way in the human heart. So these temptations, if you don't tend to them and if you don't identify them and fight against them, they can do incredible destruction in your own life. Now, Evagrius had a disciple named Cassian, John Cassian, and what he did is he kind of was mentored by his by Evagrius, and he organized these eight basic temptations into the more what he called the principal vices. And what he was trying to do was to try to make kind of it was sort of a teaching or discipleship tool that he could use to help mentor the younger monks in the desert community to fight against these sins. And so he kind of formalized it all a little bit more. Um, and so these it's kind of under the work of Cassian then that the seven deadly sins took on the form that they have now. Rebecca Canine-Dyke de Young has written an excellent book on the history of this, and she actually says it this way. She says the list of vices that were put together by Cassian endured primarily as a practical and pastoral tool. They were meant for pastoral care and discipleship and learning and growth. Um, but what about that name? What do we do with that name, Seven Deadly Sins? First of all, you might be wondering, and if you're asking this, you're actually asking a really important question. Are the seven deadly sins somehow more consequential or more deadly than other sins? And in one sense, the answer is no. All sin is deadly. All sin will separate us from God. All sin incurs God's judgment and wrath and punishment. And so it's not as if we can commit one sin as long as it's not a deadly sin and say, well, that, God might not be happy, but it's not, fatal. No, that's not what we're talking about. All sin is deadly in that sense. But sometimes there are these, well, let's say it this way, the what we call the seven deadly sins are so called because they're sort of like basic sins that give birth to a whole host of related sins. I think there's a better title that is the capital vices. The seven capital vices. That's a better title because it tells us two things. Number one, these sins are capital, not in this like in the sense that they are the capital of a state is like the head where the government flows from. So these capital vices are actually the root that give birth to all these other sins. So for example, one of the seven capital vices is gluttony. And gluttony, as we're going to see, it's more than just wanting to eat a lot. It's actually seeking contentment. It's using food and an unquenchable hunger for food and drink to quench, restlessness and longing in one's heart. So you could look at gluttony and say, well, actually, it's not just about overeating, but it's also about this deep desire for food to satisfy the longings of our heart. And that can then lead to overeating. It can lead to unhealthy eating. It can lead to self-righteous eating. Like, we know people that love to talk about the exact diet that they're on, and they're almost doing it as a way to somehow give the impression that they're superior to you. So using food as righteousness, or using food as control, or using it to soothe our pain, or using food not using food, like anorexia, can fall under this as a struggle against diet and food as a way of trying to control self. So all these other sins flow out of the capital vice of gluttony. And the second part of that is then that we call them capital vices, because a vice is something that holds you in its grip. It's the idea that habits can actually grip us, and if we aren't paying attention, they hold on to us, and it takes a lot to get out of a vice. And so the seven capital vices can really take root, like Cassian said, that these are, or like Evagrius said, they're cracks in the heart, and they become habits, and they become ways of living that can really hold a lot of power over us. Now, historically, the church has also said that the way to fight against vice is to seek virtue, to pursue virtue. And what virtue has historically been understood as, one of the things is that it's learning to properly love God. It's putting the love of God into practice. And you can begin to see, and we don't have time to flesh this all out and go into all the detail here, but that really requires a supernatural working of the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit who reorders the loves of our heart, such that we are then able to seek out and to practice the virtues that God calls us to. So virtue is not about self-improvement. It's not about human effort. It's ultimately, and properly understood, it's about the renewal of our hearts as the Holy Spirit teaches us and shows us how to love God above all else and how to love our neighbor as ourselves. Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Cutting Room Floor. Hope to see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.